1960s and the early to mid 1970s were a very stable time across the Middle East and South and Southeast Asia, Vietnam, of course, being the major exception. So all of a sudden travel became very easy. There were paved, straight, smooth roads all the way from sort of London to Singapore. And Afghanistan and Iran, which currently are places which are very difficult to travel to, were very open to the idea of receiving visitors at the time. They were stable societies with long traditions of hospitality.
So we made our way into wonderful Afghanistan. Yes, a very old and rich culture. We got on the bus, we got on with the locals, and the man came down the bus to take our money, and he had a big lump of what I thought was coal, but he had a penknife, and you'd give him the money for the ticket, and then he would scrape off a bit of this brown thing, which was hash apparently, and he'd give you some hash. So, of course, I was able to give it away quite easily. And the mountains were awesome. There didn't seem to be anything growing anywhere. How people lived. You'd come round a corner and there'd be a man walking along with a goat or a donkey, and you'd think, I wonder where he lives, or where's his house? You went through some, small villages and things. That's where the bus would stop, and we would get tea and bread. It's like another world when I see it on the television. Afghanistan. It doesn't bear any resemblance to the country that I visited in the 70s.
Afghanistan in the early 70s had a great highway system running through it. 50% was built by the Russians, 50% by the Americans, and the Afghanis had played the Americans against the Russians to get this great highway system. So driving through it, you drove on these perfect roads through the most exquisite scenery. The terrain of Afghanistan, high altitude desert, beautiful mountains over in the distance, nomads on camels, whirlwinds, dozens of whirlwinds gusting from the car all the way back to the horizon. The romance of the place was really very powerful. I never met any hostility. Both trips I made to Afghanistan, the Afghani people could not have been more caring or more welcoming. It is a tribal country, and people were armed to the teeth. You're walking through the bazaar in Kabul, guys would have guns, really old school guns, pistols in their belts. Some people even were wearing swords and daggers. These guys were armed to the teeth, and they certainly got the impression that they weren't afraid to kill and they weren't afraid to die.
Kabul in Afghanistan was another one of those hippie enclaves where, again, a lot of the young people gathered. The whole idea was the lazy point of travelling.
These restaurants, these tea houses and coffee shops and chai shops and cheap Charlie hotels were where you would get together and find out how to travel. How do you travel in that region? How do you travel in the Annapurna Himal, and what's the best season to do it in? And, where's the best restaurant? And so that was the culture of travel then, and talking with those people and exchanging narratives, personal narrative. That was your journey. That's really why you were there. That was part of why you were there.
Well, first of all, in Kabul, which was quite amazing, there was quite a bit of Western food, which we hadn't really encountered anywhere else. Yeah, you get things like pancakes and, the normal sort of backpacking type food that they make for Westerners. Yeah, that was all around an area that I remember very well, which was called Chicken Street, what they used to call the freak area, because that's where all the hippies used to go, they said. And there was a lot of camaraderie with the travellers in those days, and we used to swap maps, travel information, anything that we had that we just picked up on our part of the journey. We would pass it on to other travellers, and they would pass it on, anything you needed, on to you. So we spent many an hour sitting around in cafes drinking tea and swapping information. But there were obviously the people who were into drugs. You know, there was plenty of hash, there was plenty of marijuana. I mean, some people did spend weeks and weeks sitting around, smoking and drinking, and not necessarily drinking probably, but taking drugs and not doing anything. I couldn't see the point. I mean, I'm thinking, well, I didn't know a lot about drugs, I guess, but it just seemed to me to be a waste. You know, all this wonderful, interesting stuff around, and they wanted to sit around in cafes.
I don't think you can overestimate the importance of drugs to at least the mythical aspects of the Overland Trail, and also the the experience of the Overland Trail. The focus placed on marijuana and drugs was really astounding. The first Lonely Planet guide across Asia on the cheap, which was published in 1973, had a section on dope which was longer than the section on food. So we are talking about some very serious emphasis placed on drugs.
Hearts of Darkness scenarios. I had some tremendously depersonalising journeys travelling by myself, wondering just how far up life's back passage I could crawl without still hanging on to a semblance of sanity. I had a very sticky moment in Kabul. A group of us were sharing a room. We had smoked hashish all night and played poker dice all night. And they've got the water pipe blazing away. They've got the coals in, and they drop little blocks of hash on top, and the coals are burning so fiercely. The block of hash just about vaporizes, and they suck it straight into their lungs, and probably shredding their lungs at the same time. And I had a lot of fun. It was a typical night in. Woke up in the morning, late in the morning, more like lunchtime, and one of the guys didn't get out of bed, and he was dead. We found he was dead. He died in his sleep. He died in his sleep because he was, as opposed to us, he was doing tincture of opium and had obviously, got the mixture wrong or something, and so it was horrible to discover this guy we'd been travelling with cold in his cot. And of course, police came by. First thing they said is, "You killed him." So the cops put the blowtorch on us immediately. The rupee started to drop. That the name of the game was, if you gave the cops enough money, the murder accusation would go away. And so we had to stump up enough money to make that work. But it was pretty freaky for a while. I certainly wouldn't want to be cooling my heels in a jail in Kabul.